Honduras, boasting over 700 kilometers of stunning Caribbean coastline, lush rainforests, and massive rivers. This country still finds itself overshadowed by its history with violent crime, drug trafficking, and corrupt police. But in recent years, a lot has changed, and Honduras has made massive efforts to change its image and provide a better life for its people. Join us on our adventure to find the truth about this rich and beautiful country. Guatemala was the fifth country of the trip, and it had set the bar pretty high for Honduras. We ended up spending over a month in Guatemala, though half of that time was sorting out issues with the truck. So once everything was done, we were ready to go. We crossed into Honduras at the El Florido border crossing. We were at the end of the dry season, and it was a scorching and arid 40 degrees. After seeing our fair share of Mayan ruins and Belize and Guatemala, we decided to bypass the famous Copan ruins, instead electing to beeline for the Caribbean Sea and cool off. If you open up the Overlander wiki on Honduras, you'll see that it's cited as the most corrupt country in Central America. And like most countries in Central America, it is not recommended to drive at night. We had a lengthy border crossing and daytime was running out. After driving into the darkness against our best judgment, we found a spot out of sight and set up. That night, we crossed our first river in Honduras, and we were surprised when in the morning we were woken up by the sound of heavy machinery and dump trucks. Our hidden spot wasn't so hidden after all. We were camping at the entrance of a small quarry. We skirted the outside of San Pedro Sula and made our way to the oceanfront town of La Ceiba. Driving in Honduras isn't much different from the rest of Central America. The rules of the road often make way for common sense, and road safety makes way for necessity. By pure coincidence, it was Labor Day, and La Ceiba was packed with locals enjoying the ocean. We headed a little bit further east of La Ceiba and found a spot right on the beach. There was a party going on about a kilometer away, and there was litter floating in the water. Nikki decided to clean up as much as she could while we stayed there. Little did we know it, but that spot at the entrance of the quarry was going to be as good a camp spot as we could find in Honduras for the next while. We spent the day here, swimming and enjoying the water, but as the sun started to set, multiple locals came by and told us it was not safe to spend the night here. We knew better than to ignore their advice and drove up into the mountains to find a spot on the river. Like the night before, we ended up making camp in the dark. We woke up in a beautiful river spot not far from the road. It was hot and we decided to enjoy a morning swim.
Do it. It's deep. Hey, there you go.
The water was calm, deep, and refreshing. We had just started swimming when a man showed up on a motorcycle and sat down on the rocks across from us. He waved at us and asked if we spent the night. I told him we did, and swam over to talk to him.
Okay. Oh, wow.
He identified himself as a park ranger and told us a story of a man who was shot in the back and died here. He said this area was popular for cartels doing drug deals at night and it was not safe to stay here. We spoke to him as best we could in our limited Spanish and then took his advice and left. He said the mountains were the safest, but we were motivated to have one last chance to enjoy the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea and set off to a spot that looked accessible on Google Satellite only.
Yeah, I think we go right, and then it looks like there's a track that goes to the beach.
Palm oil is one of Honduras' biggest exports. And reports show in the last 30 years, Honduras has lost nearly half of its forests from deforestation, mainly due to agriculture. And with palm oil prices constantly rising, sites of these hypnotizingly parallel plantations are becoming more and more frequent. Eventually, we found our way to the sea. It wasn't the biggest beach, and it didn't have the clearest water, but it was quiet and felt safe. However, to our surprise, there was garbage everywhere, and with Nikki making lunch, it was my turn to clean up the beach.
I'm saying it's mostly soda bottles.
Yeah. Those we can compress.
It's for lunch.
Coconut curry.
Perfect.
Camping in a remote area is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you're isolated, have privacy, and being out of sight and out of mind is often the safest option, until a group of people walk right through your campsite. Everyone was very friendly and polite who came by, but with the warnings of the nights before fresh in our minds, it put us on edge. With the sun setting a beautiful pink hue over the water, we sat down to discuss our options for the following day. It was a quiet, peaceful night, and the next morning, after making breakfast, we loaded the 2 garbage bags we had filled onto the roof of the truck. I wish I could tell you we drove to the nearest dumpster and that was it. But the reality is, there's a reason there's so much garbage everywhere. We couldn't find a single garbage can or dumpster. Those garbage bags spent 2 days on our roof until we finally threw them out in what looks like a community-made dump. Honduras was by far the worst country we had ever seen in terms of litter. But we couldn't blame the people. They did make efforts to keep the garbage in one spot, but from everything we saw, the government simply did not provide the means to dispose of waste properly. The few garbage trucks we did see were overloaded and poorly regulated, and outside of cities, the options were extremely limited. However, problems with waste disposal aren't limited to Honduras. Small communities all over Central America face the same issues, even prompting NGOs like Ocean Cleanup to set up their interceptor program in Guatemala. We were finally heading away from the coast on Route 39, a completely unpaved national highway. Our plan was to go to Talgua Cave, or better known as the Cave of the Glowing Skulls. After a few hours, we saw a questionable bridge and decided to stop for lunch. Soon we were going higher and higher up into the mountains, leaving the coastal jungle for the dry, deciduous woodlands. The air was thick with smoke, and it didn't take long until we started to see brush fires along the road. After a long day of driving, we decided to turn west and go about 30 kilometers out of the way to a town called Juticalpa, and to find a hotel instead of looking for somewhere to camp. After a while, we found a nice place that could fit the truck in its garage and even had AC. The next day, we left early in the morning and went straight to the caves. This part of the highway had police and military checkpoints. However, Honduras isn't what it used to be. In 2017, there was a massive effort to crack down on low-level corruption, resulting in many police officers losing their jobs. Our experiences with the police and military in Honduras were peaceful. They were happy to see tourists enjoying their country, and often the interactions ended with a smile and fist bump or handshake. Eventually, we found our way to the caves. From the ticket administration office to the entrance of the cave is a short walk through the dense jungle and along the Talgua River, which was completely dry at the time. Part of the entry fee covers the mandatory provided park guide. The accessible part of the cave is about 500 meters long. Talgua Cave, the Cave of Glowing Skulls, earned its nickname from the calcite deposits and the bones found in the burial sites in the caves, which causes the bones and skulls to shimmer and sparkle in the light. Archaeologists found 23 deposits of skeletal remains throughout the cave. Using radiocarbon dating, researchers estimate some of these remains have come from as early as 1000 BCE. At the end of the cave, you come to a metal gate, beyond which is nearly another 500 meters leading to the deepest ossuary. After the caves, we stopped to get some propane. Propane is a common fuel for local taxis, as it is extremely cheap. Armed security is a common sight in Central America, guarding everything from gas stations to cafes and grocery stores. The last stop in our resupply was to get drinking water. As the tap water in all of Central America is not drinkable, these purification stations are available in nearly every town. We do carry our own manual water purification pump as well, although 20 liters is usually only about $1. Soon we were on the small, winding back roads that go through rural coffee plantations all between the towns of Campamento and Las Crucitas. Driving through these small villages is always a good experience. People are typically very friendly and curious to see foreigners. It was getting dark again, and we were looking for somewhere to stop for the night.
Saw this trail here, and everything else is gated off, but looked on the satellite and doesn't look like it goes to any houses or huts, so I'm gonna give it a try. Hopefully find a camp spot for a good start. It's steep.
Yeah, it's cool with the sunset. Oh.
The small trail led down to a little gated plantation, but by staying outside of it, we were able to find a small, slightly overgrown clearing that was completely out of sight of the road. That morning, we had our coffee while enjoying the view. Initially, our plan was to go to Nicaragua and possibly come back through part of Honduras. This meant we would head through the border crossing of Los Manos. But things don't always work out the way you plan. We were driving through the narrow, dusty roads of the coffee plantations. Coffee is Honduras' biggest export, accounting for over $1.3 billion worth of revenue annually. In fact, Honduras is Central America's biggest exporter of coffee and the 6th largest exporter of coffee in the world. These roads were only wide enough to allow one vehicle to pass at a time. Eventually, we found our way to the main road and saw a marked spot on Overlander for an abandoned quarry. The Nicaraguan border crossing requires you to have an approved form, and due to our lack of research, we failed to recognize it could take up to 7 days to receive this approval. I received my approval the next day, but for Nikki, we would end up having to wait. This is La Tolva prison, and while driving by, we were surprised to see high guard towers, fences, and gray walls. To be frank, it looked American, and this is no accident. The United States has been providing funding for prisons in Central American countries for many years as part of an effort to stop violent crime and drugs from reaching US borders. It is estimated that as much as 87% of drugs heading to the US from South America pass through Honduras. President Juan Orlando Hernandez described the shame in being depicted as the most violent country on earth in a Vice documentary on the state of the Honduran prison system. And since 2012, Honduras has seen a large decline in its homicide and violent crime rate. Unfortunately, despite this, they still rank in the top 5 countries in the world for murder rate. And despite all the efforts, only a few weeks before making this video, Honduras saw another takeover that took the lives of 46 female inmates, prompting the military to take over Honduras' prisons. We made camp as sun was setting, and while we were waiting for approval from Nicaragua the next day, we suddenly had to leave, fast.
Yeah, so we're driving back east to Danley. We were watching a movie in the tent and then saw a gray Hilux pulling up with some of the National Police and I think maybe also one of the prison yards, because there was a prison across the road from the abandoned quarry we were camping in. And at first I thought they were just coming to check, and then when I looked out the window and they saw me, they all kind of hopped out in the crouch position, walking with guns drawn, and told us to get out and show our hands. So yeah, we did, and they just wanted to check the paperwork and our passports and make sure everything was good, but they also told us it was dangerous to camp there and told us to pack up, and they kind of just supervised while we put the camp away. And yeah, that was that. So now we're heading east again.
Despite the interaction, the police were all polite and professional. They didn't ask for any bribes or money and followed us out. The story was the same. It wasn't safe here. We ended up going back into the mountains and found this beautiful lagoon surrounded by horse ranches. The next morning, we enjoyed the peace and quiet of the lagoon and waited. After Nikki had cleaned up the trash around our campsite, we decided to leave since there was no reception in the spot, and we were waiting on an email. went to a small town near the border called El Paraiso, where we stayed in Hotel Isis. Good timing because all of a sudden we got our first look at what the rainy season had in store. To make matters worse for the poor vendors, the rain brought power outages. Soon we were driving through the massive line of trucks waiting for their turn to cross into Nicaragua, and upon getting to the border, we were told there are no right-hand drive vehicles allowed into Nicaragua. We knew there was a chance of this happening, but heard of people paying bribes and took our chance. It seemed like we were meant to travel Honduras at this point, and disappointed in our failed attempt to cross into Nicaragua, we decided to head to the Pacific coast this time. We were going to Tiger Island, a relatively small volcanic island in the Gulf of Fonseca. It was a fairly long drive, and since we left early in the afternoon, we decided to make camp somewhere along the way and head to the island in the morning. However, despite choosing the sketchiest roads we could find, leading to what looked like the middle of nowhere, we could not find a camp spot. People in Honduras don't just take the time, effort, and money to build roads for fun. If there's a road, it's going somewhere, usually to someone's farm or home. It was getting dark, and eventually we found a river crossing that looked promising.
What are you thinking?
We'll go across. It's not deep.
After crossing the river, we were met with a rocky, slightly off-camber road. And despite all of this, we ended up at someone's farm again. Frustrated and tired, we decided to just drive into the forest right off the road and call it a night. That night, as the villagers returned to their farm, they curiously shone their flashlights right into our tent while we tried to sleep. The next morning, we made our way straight to the island. The road was poorly maintained and full of potholes. Soon we saw the volcanic island poking out from behind the trees. There are gated parking lots all around the dock for a fair price, and after parking the truck, we found a water taxi to take us to the beach. Tiger Island rarely sees travelers and tends to be more of a holiday spot for locals. The boat ride over is a short 15 minutes with a stop at Amapala, the main town on the island, and then off to Playa Grande, the main beach. After anchoring, you are on your own to go find a hotel or do whatever you want.
Oh my god, he was here.
Oh, he actually was?
It says so.
In 1931, Einstein was here?
Yeah, he actually was here. I searched it up, and Einstein did in fact travel to Honduras. And Tiger Island was actually a major German port at the time, so in all likelihood, he did visit here. After asking around at the main beach, the hotels were shockingly expensive at over $50 a night. And this may not seem like a lot, but it was well over double the price of some of the nicer hotels we stayed at. We decided to take a tuk-tuk to the main town and see if the prices were any better, despite being told they would not be. The town of Amapalo was nice and colorful, but surprisingly, despite it being the weekend, there was almost no one around. We found a nice little hotel with a pool and air conditioning for about $20. After, we decided to walk around the island and go to the smaller beaches. However, they were more muddy than sandy and we decided we'd swim in the pool instead. We read that Tiger Island is a popular spot on the weekends for the higher class from Tegucigalpa, but it seemed like they preferred the privacy of their waterfront villas. The main beach did have some more people, but overall the island has a high unemployment rate, and the majority of the villages struggle with poverty. We decided to get some seafood at the beachfront restaurant. The 2 meals ended up costing more than the hotel though. Some rain had come and the power had gone out, and we were told it is nearly a daily occurrence during the rainy season. We spent the night and the next day decided to head back to the mainland. However, getting a boat proved to be fairly difficult. Eventually, we were able to get a ride with a group of people and split the cost. After we got back to the truck, we decided to head towards El Salvador. At this point, we had been talking to the El Salvador Toyota Club, even before trying to go into Nicaragua, in order to get a letter of approval for driving the truck into the country. This was exclusively due to the fact that the truck is a right-hand drive vehicle. El Salvador and Honduras are separated by the Rio Guascaran, and after driving through a small town, we were able to find a beautiful spot on a grassy bank. We weren't sure what the border would look like between the two countries, but were fairly surprised to see it was completely open. The river is shallow, and you could simply walk or even drive across if you wish. This is because El Salvador and Honduras are part of the Central American for Free Mobility Act, better known as the CA4, a piece of legislation that was signed in 2006 between Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua to allow citizens to move freely between the 4 countries without restrictions or checks. We use an MSR Guardian water pump to purify water, so camping next to a water source is ideal for us. At night, local fishermen came out and used cast nets. The occasional rancher would also come out as well, but otherwise this was a beautiful, quiet spot. The river was full of these interesting little 4-eyed fish, and their name is quite literal. They have 2 eyes that see up out of the water and 2 eyes just below that look down into the water. The river was shallow, but a farmer came by and told us there was a slightly deeper spot on the other side that was slightly cooler. It was close to 40 degrees and humid. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the Toyota Club just stopped responding to our messages. We had spent 3 days here and decided instead of wasting our time further, we would go to Tegucigalpa and get some solar panels after ours had been damaged beyond repair in Mexico many months ago. However, on the way there, we suddenly started getting an intermittently soft brake pedal. And after checking the brakes and finding no leaks, I noticed there was a very slight wobble in the steering wheel when turning. After lifting the truck, I could tell the front left bearing had completely failed. We drove slowly to the next town, which happened to be Comayagua. This was a good spot to have an issue. They had 2 large auto parts stores which luckily had everything we needed, including 2 inner and outer bearings and seals, and a very nice, reasonably priced hotel with air conditioning. Which was great, because I got the flu the same day. A few days later, it was time to change out the bearings, but it was much worse than I had thought.
So, the inner bearing, you can sort of see under the grease. This is actually the race, or not even the race. This is the actual inner bearing. So all the rollers are gone. They've disintegrated. It's supposed to look like this, just slightly smaller, and could barely get the hub off because it's pretty much welded itself onto the spindle. But yeah, so the outer bearing, I think I said inner, but the outer bearing completely shattered, and now the inner part of it is sort of welded on to the spindle. So we're gonna have to try and get that off.
Still battling a fever, I tried everything I could for about 3 hours. Hammering, tying a strap around, and using the jack to pull it. Eventually, a guy from the hotel lent me his angle grinder.
Yay!
Super hot. It took 3 hours to pack these bearings. So you kind of just push until the grease starts squeezing out in between the rollers. And yeah.
Afterwards, it was just a simple reassembly and then a battle trying to get the caliper bolts back in. The next day, we continued on to Tegucigalpa to get the solar panels. We went to a number of hotels and even hostels, but couldn't find anywhere that had tall enough parking for the truck, so we ended up just coming back to Comayagua. Like any city, Tegucigalpa has its good parts and bad parts, but the areas we went to were actually very nice. After getting everything we needed, we headed back to Comayagua, and back to the same hotel we had stayed at. The guys that were there were super nice. We talked to them about the trip, they lent us tools, and they even got us some watermelon. And the next day, while installing the solar panels, they provided some live music. The setup for the panels was straightforward. I used 1-inch angle iron to mount them side by side, and then the roof bars on the tent have slotted channels that fit the head of a bolt. The whole assembly then gets bolted directly onto the roof bars. We left the same day the solar panels went up and headed to Cerro Azul Miamba National Park. Just outside the park is a beautiful free camp spot next to a small dam. Shortly after we parked, a van with a traveling family pulled up to camp next to us, and Nikki finally got to practice her Dutch.
Dan heb je een badge.
En dan ben je een ranger.
Ja, ik ben er van
En wat houdt het dan in?
The next morning, the family left early to do some hikes in the park, and we decided to enjoy the lake, until this happened.
Just crashed the drone up in those trees. So I'm gonna pack a dry bag.
I wasn't going to lose this drone, not again. It had been through too much and I couldn't afford to replace it. Literally. So I packed my bush pants into a dry bag with the controller and made my way into the dense jungle. It was tough to get to the top. The vines were like thick ropes tangling around my feet, and once I got to the top, I had almost given up when I finally found it under a bush. A piece in the arm was broken and the lens had come off. That would be the end of the drone shots in Honduras. And in fact, I later learned the GPS module in the gimbal had also been damaged. When I had come out of the jungle, there were some fishermen there, and one had a spear gun. He told me there were big fish in the lake, so I geared up and got in the water. Maybe there are big fish, but the visibility was terrible. I ended up just going for a nice swim around the lake. We decided to go to the main lake outside the national park, Lake Yohoa, and after spending the day driving around, we just couldn't find any wild camp spots again. We saw on iOverlander someone had mentioned a place called Cabañas Agua Azul, and they said they let you camp near their dock. So we showed up in the dark at night, and they told us it was free, as long as we kept it clean. And what a spot. Lake Yohoa is the biggest lake in Honduras, formed in a volcanic depression. We spent the day relaxing and watching some of the 400 bird species identified here. We were finally on our way out of Honduras, and we had one more official stop to make in San Pedro Sula.
So we're at the Jungle Brewing Company, and this is the last day in Honduras. We're heading back up north to Guatemala, and this is the garden area that they've got here. We just finished packing up the truck, and it's about 9 a.m. Gonna try to do a long day of driving, and yeah, slowly make our way back towards Mexico. Hopefully figure out something for shipping the truck eventually to Colombia. But this place was great. It actually had some of the, or not some of the, had the best craft beer that either of us have had probably in Central America, like the review said. Are you excited? Let's go back to Guatemala. No. No, you're not.
No, I want to go. I want to go to El Salvador.
Well, El Salvador stopped responding to our messages, so thanks for that, Toyota Club. I'm sorry to say I'm disappointed. I'm sure you're a nice guy, whoever runs it, but yeah, well, he'll see this. No, I'm just kidding. He probably won't watch this video. Salvador Toyota Club watches this. Just kidding, just kidding.
And just like that, we were heading along the Caribbean coast to leave out of the Corinto border crossing, encountering another long line of trucks waiting for their turn across the border. When all was done, this is what our route looked like through the country. In conclusion, I think Honduras is a country with a lot of potential. We did miss Roatan and its surrounding islands in the Mesoamerican Reef, which is Honduras' biggest source of tourism. Though we have no personal point of comparison, the corruption that was written about historically seems to be a far less concern in Honduras today. However, with that said, it is a country still recovering and fighting its violent past and present, and does require you to exercise caution. Camping for overlanders is a struggle, and if you drive through the country, expect to rely on hotels. We meet many people that during their trip through Central America avoid Honduras. But I don't think Honduras today is a country you have to miss. The numbers in terms of violent crime are still undoubtedly high, but also largely skewed by the gang-on-gang violence. The people of Honduras were nothing but kind and welcoming, and we wish them luck as a country in their battle for a better and safer Honduras. And as always, thanks for watching.